Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, when we study these monumental figures in history, especially the ones who presided over the birth of empires, we almost always focus on the big things.
Right, the huge historical actions.
Exactly. The military victories, the constitutional decisions, the geopolitical crises. But today, we want to intentionally shift our focus. We're moving away from the battlefields and the council rooms.
That's right, because the sources you've shared, they really invite us to zoom in on something much more foundational, something that actually underpins all those massive actions.
And that's the personal life and character of Abu Bakr As-Siddiq.
Exactly. We're moving past the Caliph as a military leader and really looking at the man, the neighbor, the husband, the community member.
So our mission for this deep dive is, well, it's pretty focused and frankly a bit radical. We want to understand how his personal integrity, this extreme humility, his commitment to justice, his just unrelenting simplicity, how that wasn't just something that coexisted with his leadership,
But actually became the driving force of it.
Yes. We're trying to pull out lessons for today, lessons on how power should work, but drawing from the tiny details of his daily life.
And this whole journey really starts with a central paradox. It's a paradox that defines his entire 2-year rule.
Okay, what's the paradox?
How does a man who inherits the ultimate authority, I mean, he's ruling the entire Muslim Ummah, he's suddenly responsible for this expanding territory, how does that man live and behave as if he were still the poorest, least powerful man in the city?
That is a paradox. Historically, power always seeks to elevate itself.
It always seeks elevation. But Abu Bakr, he seemed to seek, well, deflation. He wanted to be smaller.
It's just completely counterintuitive. I mean, you look at any other model of governance from that time, the Roman emperors, the Persian shahs.
Oh, absolutely.
The whole point was that supreme authority meant supreme luxury, isolation, entitlement.
And Abu Bakr's model was the precise inverse of that. He actively sought proximity, austerity, and accountability. It was revolutionary.
So we've kind of distilled this approach into 4 core areas we want to explore.
Right, so first we'll look at his unwavering commitment to simplicity in his daily life. Then second, his financial integrity. This is a huge one. How he handled public funds.
Okay.
Third, how that personal character translated directly into this uncompromising standard of justice for everyone. And finally, the anecdotes, the stories that show his mastery of what we now call true servant leadership.
So we're really trying to dissect how a private commitment to piety became a very public, very political policy.
That's the goal.
Okay, let's jump in. Segment 1. The paradox of power and this idea of simplicity in his daily life. The moment he becomes caliph, the transition is instantaneous.
It is. But the sources are so insistent that absolutely nothing about his lifestyle changed. And that contrast is, well, it's jarring.
He has the title, Caliph, the successor, the ultimate authority.
But there was a complete absence of all the usual scaffolding of power. No palace. He continued to live in his modest home.
No guards.
No retinue guards insulating him from the people. No state-sponsored luxury of any kind.
And it's not just the absence of luxury that's so striking, is it? It feels like an active rejection of status.
It is.
If you think about his contemporaries, in the Byzantine or Sasanian empires, the main function of their state architecture, their clothes, everything.
It was all to reinforce power.
Right. Every massive column, every guard's uniform, it was all screaming, you are fundamentally beneath this man.
And Abu Bakr, he just actively dismantled that whole psychological barrier.
Yeah.
He understood that his authority, it didn't come from opulence. It came from moral trustworthiness. The second he relied on those external symbols of status.
He would have distanced himself from the people.
Exactly, the very people he was sworn to serve.
But I have to ask, wasn't there a political danger in this? I mean, this is a tribal society.
Yeah.
Status and wealth often dictated influence, loyalty.
Of course.
So wouldn't showing up with no pomp, no guards, wouldn't that have made him look politically vulnerable to rivals or even external enemies?
That is such a probing question. And, the answer really lies in the moral authority he'd already built up over decades. His political strength, it wasn't from force or from wealth. It was from his moral capital, his undisputed closeness to the prophet himself.
So his simplicity wasn't a signal of weakness.
No. It signaled unimpeachable moral integrity. Rivals couldn't really attack his policies because they couldn't find a flaw in his character. His accessibility, it actually became a defense mechanism. If he had been seen as aloof or self-interested, that early community, it might have just fractured.
So his austerity became his armor. That's a fascinating way to put it. And the best evidence for this is how he kept doing these utterly ordinary domestic tasks.
Yes, the domestic leader. The sources highlight this again and again. Here's the leader responsible for uniting a fractured region, directing major military campaigns.
And he's still doing his chores.
He's still doing his chores, insisting on it.
Let's get specific. The story about him continuing to milk goats for his neighbors, that one is iconic. Why is that one detail so powerful?
Because it speaks directly to consistency, to being grounded. The people of Medina, they had a relationship with Abu Bakr, the neighbor, the guy who helped them with essential demanding tasks.
Right.
When he became Abu Bakr, the Caliph, they were probably afraid that the relationship was over. But then he shows up the next day, bucket in hand, ready to milk the goats.
He's proving the title is just a job. It's not who he is.
It's a job description,
Yeah.
not a transformation of his identity.
Well, he kept his chores and he kept his accessibility. We also read that he was routinely found sweeping the mosque floor himself.
Right, not delegating it, physically doing it.
What does that communicate?
It says that no task is beneath the leader if it helps the community. In a state where everyone is supposed to be equal before God, the highest office holder physically cleaning the common house of worship, it just powerfully reinforces that spiritual equality.
He cooked his own food, fetched his own water.
These weren't just habits, they were practical demonstrations. He was showing he didn't need a special entourage just to exist.
It's an exhausting level of commitment, though. I mean, we're talking about a man who, after dealing with major state crises, making decisions that literally shaped the future map,
Right.
he would then walk the streets to personally help widows and orphans, often without anyone even knowing.
And that's the crux of it.
Yeah.
It's not just charity, it's the method. He didn't just set up a Department of Widows and Orphans and send a bureaucrat.
No, he went himself.
He acted directly, hands-on. And that practice, it fundamentally changes how people see the state. It dissolves that barrier of hierarchy. It replaces the image of some abstract, distant government with the reality of a compassionate, accessible caretaker.
So let's analyze the political consequence of that. What does it truly mean for an administration when the highest official operates at the level of the common person? How does that establish trust in a way that, centralized power usually fails to do?
Well, it creates this feedback loop of authenticity. First, it assures the average citizen that the leader actually understands their daily reality. You don't need to petition the Caliph to explain how hard it is to get water or care for livestock.
Because he's dealing with the same things.
He's dealing with those same basic challenges. And second, and this is maybe more important, it sets a mandate for every single layer of governance beneath him.
How so?
Well, if the Caliph himself is sweeping the mosque and milking goats, how can any governor or judge or commander dare to demand luxury or special status or distance from the people?
It establishes a cultural precedent you can't argue with. The role of the state is service, not status.
It eliminates the breeding ground for rumors, for corruption, for that profound disconnect that plagues ruling elites throughout all of history. If the citizens see their Caliph accessible and humble, they believe he's acting in their interest.
So his radical simplicity is actually his most sophisticated political tool.
Precisely. It communicates one powerful, repeated message. My devotion to the state is pure, it's unmonetized, and it's rooted in service.
And that sets us up perfectly for the next segment, doesn't it? Because if a leader lives simply but has hidden wealth, the whole thing just crumbles.
The whole foundation crumbles.
Which brings us to segment 2, integrity in appearance and finance. We're shifting from his labor to his public image and, critically, his relationship with money.
And we have to start with his clothes, his visible humility. The sources, they all describe him wearing simple, old clothes. He actively avoided any fabric or style that would mark him out as high status.
It's the detail of him patching his own garments that just gets me. We are talking about the highest official in the land, personally sewing up holes in his clothes.
Never buying expensive fabrics, consciously wearing what the common working people wore.
This wasn't just, being frugal. It felt like something more.
It was a deliberate act of solidarity. A public performance of piety, really. In this new Islamic society, there was this profound idea that social distinctions based on material wealth were superficial. Abu Bakr's clothes, they were a walking sermon.
And this leads to that really powerful story about his appearance in the mosque.
Yes, on one occasion, he comes into the mosque wearing a garment that was so worn, so frequently patched, that some of the companions, seeing the leader of the entire Muslim community like this, They were moved to tears.
But they weren't crying out of pity, right? They knew he wasn't poor. He'd been a successful merchant.
Exactly. They weren't weeping for his poverty. They were crying out of awe, out of admiration for the level of humility he chose to maintain, despite holding supreme power.
That's the moment of realization for them.
It is. The standard he set derived this core teaching. Dignity comes from your character, not your clothing. He was teaching the community that the moral and spiritual weight of a person vastly outweighs any external status symbol.
If the leader's integrity is solid, he doesn't need silks to command respect.
That's it. His authority came from inside, not from his wardrobe.
Okay, now let's move to the most sensitive area, the salary. Financial integrity. This part is truly shocking when you compare it to, well, any other ruler in history.
It is. The morning after he becomes Caliph, what's his plan?
To go to the market.
To go straight to the market and continue working as a merchant.
Mm-hmm.
He saw his role in government as a temporary spiritual burden of service, not a career change.
He was going to support his family with his own hands, just like he always had.
But this created an immediate practical problem for governing, didn't it?
It crisis, really. And it was his companion, the future Caliph Umar, who stepped in.
Umar's argument was just logical. He was practical.
Mm.
He said, the responsibilities of the state unifying the tribes, administering justice, military command, it's too heavy.
You can't do that and run a market stall.
You need to dedicate your full, uninterrupted time to governance. You can't run an empire and a shop at the same time.
So they had to establish a salary. How did they figure out how much to pay him?
The calculation was revolutionary. It wasn't based on the value of the office. It was based purely on necessity.
What does that mean, necessity?
It means the sources stress it was a tiny salary, just enough to cover the absolute basics. Food, clothing, shelter for his family. It was designed to stop him from being distracted by the need to work, but it was explicitly designed not to generate wealth or comfort.
An allowance for a burden, not a reward for a position.
Perfect way to put it. And that small, necessary salary is what sets the stage for his most defining act of financial transparency, his radical retirement package.
At the end of his life.
Absolutely. He served for just over 2 years, receiving this basic wage. But every single moment, every grain of that public wealth that he used, it weighed on his conscience.
He saw the state treasury, the Beit al-Mal, as a sacred trust.
And any money he took for himself, even though it was approved, felt like a necessary infringement on that trust. He lived by this ultimate principle that leadership must be utterly, spotlessly clean. Every piece of wealth had to be halal.
Lawfully and morally clean.
Yes. So when he was nearing the end of his life, his final instruction, it wasn't about his inheritance or his personal wealth. It was about public accountability.
He ordered them to do what?
He ordered, return all the money of my salary to the Beit al-Mal.
Return all of it. But he must have spent it on food and clothes. How could they return it?
This is where his meticulousness is just astounding.
Yeah.
He wasn't returning cash. He was returning the assets he had acquired using the salary.
Okay.
The sources list 3 specific items that he ordered to be returned. These 3 things represented the total physical accumulation from his public allowance during his entire time as Caliph.
And they were a camel, a water jug, and a servant.
Now think about that for a second. A camel, which was necessary for state travel and logistics. A water jug, the most basic utensil for survival. And a servant, who was likely a shared public servant, assigned to him for help with his state duties.
So he was tracking every public resource he used, down to a water jug.
Down to the water jug. And he made sure they were either paid back from his own private funds or physically returned to the state treasury.
That implies a level of, I don't know, internal auditing and integrity that's just, it's unheard of. It's like he had 2 separate mental ledgers, his own money and the state's money.
And there was a firewall between them. There is no record of any other contemporary ruler tracking public assets like this. None. In Byzantium, in Persia, public funds were the ruler's personal wealth.
Of course.
Expenditures were for vanity, for military campaigns, for their own dynasty. The idea that a ruler would track resources down to the most minor item, it's just not on the map.
And that single act must have sent an unmistakable message to everyone, to the treasury officials, to future caliphs.
The message was simple. Public funds are not yours. He established the ultimate standard. It made it impossible for any successor to plead ignorance about integrity.
It solidifies that crucial link between inner morality and public integrity. Which brings us, I think, seamlessly to segment 3, the cornerstone of justice and fairness.
It's the logical next step. Because he had no financial incentives, no luxury to protect, no personal wealth from the state, he was uniquely free to administer justice without bias.
He had nothing personal to lose by just upholding the truth.
Nothing at all.
And the scope of this equality, according to the sources, it was universal. He treated everyone the same, rich and poor.
Arab and non-Arab, believers and people of other faiths, men and women, young and old. And we have to contextualize how revolutionary this was.
Go on.
Pre-Islamic Arabian society was a highly stratified system. It was dominated by your tribe, your lineage, your wealth. Justice was often transactional. It bent to the pressure of the powerful clan.
So to create a system where a poor non-Arab had the same legal standing as the wealthiest Quraysh leader
Was to fundamentally dismantle the entire social structure
Mm.
and replace it with a rule based purely on divine law and ethical principle. He wasn't just promising neutrality, he was actively enforcing equality where it had never existed before.
And this whole commitment is really captured in that one defining statement he made, isn't it? The one that became the bedrock of Islamic justice.
It is the monumental quote. "The weak among you will be strong with me until I give them their rights."
Let's just unpack that statement. It's so much more than "my court will be neutral."
Oh, it's an active intervention. It signals a complete reversal of the traditional power dynamic. In any typical society, the strong are already strong, and they use that to oppress the weak.
Right.
Abu Bakr declared that his authority, the supreme power of the state, would be mobilized to counteract that inherent imbalance. He wasn't just promising to be a fair judge, he was promising to lend the state's immense strength to the person who had none.
So his only priority was truth and justice.
Mhm.
And that eliminated all the favoritism, the tribal bias.
And it links directly back to his personal acts of service. His public rhetoric wasn't some abstract promise, it was a mirror of his private actions. He didn't just talk about protecting the weak, he was out there at night, personally cleaning the houses of the old and blind.
This seamless blend of public promise and private practice, that's what gave his justice system such unparalleled moral weight.
It's what made it real.
And that takes us right into segment 4, servant leadership in deep practice. We're moving from the policy of justice to the specific, often hidden actions that showed his dedication.
The sources reveal this meticulous routine of nocturnal service. He was dedicated to finding and helping those in need, but he chose to do it secretly, at night.
To ensure his sincerity, to avoid public praise.
Exactly. He wanted it to be pure.
Let's list some of these activities because they really show the extent of his personal involvement. We read that he cleaned the house of a blind old woman.
He prepared her meals. He cooked for widows and poor families. Sometimes he would give away his own food. He gave charity secretly, and he regularly visited the sick.
These are not the tasks of a caliph commanding armies and managing treaties.
No, these are the duties of a dedicated relative or a good neighbor. It shows he fundamentally redefined the job description of a ruler. It wasn't just managing the macroeconomy, it was managing the micro-suffering of his community.
I want to focus on that anecdote about the blind old woman because it's so powerful. There was a man who got curious about the Caliph's movements after hours.
Yes, the source mentions that this was Umar ibn al-Khattab, always observant, always intense. He was puzzled by Abu Bakr's secret movements. He thought maybe it was some clandestine state business.
He followed him one night.
He followed him. He wanted to discover the secret of the Caliph's midnight trips. And the discovery wasn't geopolitical or military or administrative at all.
No, he saw Abu Bakr go into a small, modest home. He waited, and when Abu Bakr left, Umar went inside.
And he found a blind, elderly woman living there alone. She had no family support. And when Umar asked her who helped her, she said that every night a man she didn't know would come, clean her house, sweep her floor, prepare her meals.
And take care of everything she couldn't manage herself.
And that man was the Caliph, operating in complete anonymity.
Wow.
The sheer juxtaposition. The man holding the destiny of millions of people performing basic physical domestic labor. It caused Umar to just break down. This is the anecdote that defines his legacy.
And the quote that followed, it's probably the most famous summary of Abu Bakr's standard of service.
Yes, Umar cried, just overwhelmed by this impossible standard, and he said, "O Abu Bakr, you have worn out the backs of those who come after you."
Worn out the backs. What exactly does that mean?
It's an incredibly loaded statement. It means that the standard of dedication and selfless service Abu Bakr set was so far beyond normal human capacity, so self-sacrificing, that any leader who came after him, including Umar himself, would find it almost impossible to measure up.
It's almost a lament, isn't it? Acknowledging that one man, by choosing this path, permanently redefined the burden of the office.
He made the job description heavier. Future leaders could no longer claim they were too busy for the mundane tasks of service. He showed that true governance covers everything from leading armies to cleaning a blind woman's floor.
He fused the highest office with the lowest social function.
And in doing so, he made sure that the pursuit of power could never again be divorced from the duty of profound service to the weakest in society.
That level of commitment must have taken an immense emotional toll, which leads us perfectly into segment 5, humility and the fear of responsibility. This was not a man who enjoyed power.
Far from it. The sources paint him as a deeply reluctant ruler. He was constantly aware of the spiritual weight of his duties. This wasn't ambition being satisfied. This was duty being reluctantly accepted.
We hear him saying things like, I wish someone else had taken this responsibility instead of me. Why is that reluctance so important for understanding him?
Well, when a leader seeks power, they're usually motivated by personal gain or glory. The exercise of power becomes an ego project. But when a leader accepts power reluctantly, as a duty pressed upon them, the motivation shifts completely. It becomes one of spiritual obligation and profound accountability before God. His reluctance was the most powerful check against the arrogance and corruption that power usually creates.
He was constantly reminded that he was just holding a temporary, fearsome trust.
And that spiritual sensitivity, it came out in his public persona. The sources highlight his visible softness. He cried frequently, both while leading prayers and giving sermons.
Cried out of what?
Out of an intense spiritual awareness of his responsibilities. His heart was described as soft, gentle, and just overflowing with the fear of Allah. And this emotional transparency is key because it humanized the office. The people saw their leader wasn't being hardened by power, but rather softened by responsibility.
He was intensely aware of the moral consequences of every single decision.
Every military order, every legal ruling, every allocation of funds.
So you have this incredible synthesis. The commander-in-chief, the chief executive, who remained the simplest, most humble, softest-hearted, and most accessible leader of his time.
It's a paradox of strength, isn't it? His strength came from his vulnerability. It came from his consistent moral high ground. He could be resolute in military campaigns because his personal life offered no ground for critics to attack his motives.
His personal humility was his political superpower.
It absolutely was. It earned him credibility and loyalty that no opulent king could ever match.
It's just an extraordinary template for leadership, which brings us to our final segment, segment 6, Lessons for Today, Leadership as a Lighthouse. We've looked at these radical historical examples. How do we synthesize all of this into concrete, actionable insights for modern leaders?
I think we can use the 7 core lessons from his life as a framework. These aren't just historical footnotes. They're timeless principles for building trust and good governance in any system.
Okay, let's start with number 1. Leadership is service, not status. How does milking goats translate to managing a modern company or government?
It means moving past just positional authority to genuine, hands-on care. In modern corporate terms, you might call it the Gemba walk.
Which means?
It just means going to the actual place where the work happens. The factory floor, the customer service center, the front line. It means being visible, accessible, and willing to engage with the messy, real challenges. A leader who operates from an insulated tower, relying only on curated reports, they just lose touch with reality.
So the leader serves to enable those doing the work.
Exactly. The flow of value goes from the top to the bottom, not the other way around.
Okay, lesson number 2. Simplicity increases honor, not luxury. In a world that's obsessed with branding and projecting success through material things, private jets, mansions, designer clothes, how does austerity build respect today?
Well, luxury inherently creates distance and suspicion and resentment, especially when the public is facing hardship. Simplicity, on the other hand, it creates connection and trust. When modern public figures, whether they're politicians or CEOs, choose austerity like taking a modest salary or flying commercial, they signal a clarity of motive. They're telling everyone, I am here for the mission, not for my own personal elevation. And that choice, it builds a moral currency that no amount of private opulence could ever buy.
Right, it protects the reputation. Moving on to number 3. Wealth must be earned and spent with integrity. We talked about his radical retirement package. What's the modern lesson there?
It's the absolute pillar of trust. The moment the public even suspects a leader is using their office for private gain, whether it's subtle insider trading or funneling contracts to friends, the legitimacy of the whole institution is damaged.
Critically damaged.
Abu Bakr's standard wasn't just about what's legal. It was about moral cleanliness, treating every cent of public funds as a sacred trust. For leaders today, that demands rigorous, transparent, externally audited separation of their personal and public finances.
Lesson 4. Justice must never bend to pressure. His insistence on protecting the weak, regardless of tribal power, was historic. How hard is that for modern leaders, with lobbyists and donors constantly exerting influence?
It's incredibly difficult. But the principle is non-negotiable for stable governance. Abu Bakr established that justice has to be blind to social or economic status.
So for a modern leader,
It means creating and defending institutions that operate without political interference. Even when those institutions investigate your own allies or financial backers, the priority has to be the truth and protecting the vulnerable party, no matter the political cost.
okay, number 5, a leader must care for people, not dominate them. That distinction between guardianship and control feels really important.
It is. Domination relies on fear and hierarchy to enforce compliance. Guardianship relies on care and trust to build loyalty. Abu Bakr saw his role as a guardian, like a shepherd protecting his flock,
So a modern leader using this principle would see their employees or constituents.
as assets to be nurtured, protected, and empowered, not as resources to be exploited for organizational goals. The focus is always on the welfare of the collective.
Lesson 6 goes to the internal dimension. A clean heart makes a clean government.
The character of the leader sets the moral ceiling for the entire administration. If the leader is known to be humble and sensitive to suffering, like Abu Bakr was, crying out of fear of accountability, that caution and integrity, it filters down through the ranks.
And if the leader is arrogant or morally lax,
Then corruption and waste will inevitably flourish in the bureaucracy. You simply cannot separate personal ethics from public management.
And finally, number 7, personal humility creates public trust. This really brings us full circle.
It's the core lesson. Humility is the essential antidote to the arrogance that power breeds. By staying grounded, patching his own clothes, fearing his own accountability, Abu Bakr signaled to the public that he hadn't forgotten where he came from, that he was still one of them.
It makes a leader relatable, approachable, trustworthy.
Exactly. When people feel their leader is a humble human being committed to service, rather than some untouchable figure obsessed with status, they are far more likely to grant that leader their loyalty and support, especially in a crisis.
This whole deep dive, it really paints a picture of a form of governance that is just radically inverted from every historical norm. It redefines strength, not as the ability to command resources, but as the capacity for profound self-denial and service.
It's the model of integrated authority. He fused the ultimate spiritual and political office with the lowest social functions. He proved that true success in leadership is built on profound humility, not on accumulating wealth or power.
So to quickly summarize the core values we've pulled out, greatness is in simplicity.
Powers in service.
Respect is in humility, and justice must always be paired with active fairness for the weakest members of society.
He essentially left a moral and political epitaph that is hard to ignore. He lived like a neighbor, ruled like a guardian, and died like a saint. It's an impossible yet necessary standard for anyone who follows.
And this leaves us with one final provocative thought for you to carry forward from this deep dive. We've spent all this time examining a ruler who actively worked to minimize his personal intake from the state, who saw the office as a net financial and emotional burden dedicated purely to service. So what would be the practical implications, not just moral, but administrative, economic, political, if today's leaders across all sectors committed to treating their public office solely as a temporary, voluntary burden rather than a permanent source of private gain and status? What happens when the cost of high office, measured in personal sacrifice, actually exceeds the rewards? Something to consider as you reflect on this unique example of governance built entirely on humility.